Hi friends! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Aireonna. I'm joined by a special guest, Jensen. Today I've been reading your articles right now if anyone wants to follow him. His name's Ninercast on Twitter. Always putting out articles on si.com for Fan Nation. And I've been following you for a while now. I think you were Sky More when I first started reading your articles. But I'm so excited to have you on. I was just telling.
Well, thanks for having me.
I was just telling a friend of mine, like I've always felt. I think one of the first articles I read about yours, you were like comparing the '94 team to the 2000s team or something. It was earlier this season. Yeah. And I just thought you did such a fantastic job at like going really in depth with it and everything, and really, really, really liked it. So I'm excited that you're on.
All right.
And we're about 2 weeks post Super Bowl, and the off season is in full swing. We've had tons to talk about, and then we have tons more coming up: the combine, coaches meeting, or owners meetings, all that. How are you feeling? Just maybe give a little bit background about yourself for just a short amount of time.
Quickly, okay.
Anyone watching?
I covered the Niners in radio from 1985 to 1988, so I was there with Walsh, Montana, Rice, Lott, the big names in the great years where it was just epic teams, Hall of Famers, and that was
That's why your standards are high.
Yeah. You know, I have seen the real genius. I have seen what they can do. I've seen them win championships, and so that gives me some perspective in looking at what's going on now of what are they doing right, what are they doing wrong, what needs to happen to get them over the top, that sort of thing. And so now I'm just going to start a YouTube channel, or will in a couple weeks, and writing for Grant on that side.
Yeah, everyone has to follow your articles. It's especially, I love the, I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be so much good content this off season, but during the season, the post game and preview games, I feel like you always gave me, especially when I enjoyed reading them even prior to doing content, but especially getting into content, I feel like I feel like everyone kind of does this, but I would steal like you'd be like, this is what you need to look out for. And so like in the game, I'd be looking out for that. And then in my post game, I'd be talking about that. So yeah. So excited to have you on. I think one of the things that I wanted to say, Joey says, I'm a new subscriber and you do an awesome job. Thank you so much, Joey. Everyone, please like and subscribe. And then Daniel says, good afternoon. But I thought for this, starting out this stream, I wanted to maybe start with a bigger overall general question before we get into the nitty gritty, because I think a lot of what I've been talking about on my channel all week, and since the Super Bowl has kind of been like, okay, who are we going to bring back? Who are we going to look to target? We'll talk about the defensive coordinator. I know Tim Kawakami kind of put a little bit of rumblings last night, I think, to stir people up. And then
he's got us all on pins and needles waiting, and then nothing.
Yeah. For anyone who didn't hear, Tim Kawakami came out and basically made a tweet saying the 49ers were going to hire a defensive coordinator soon. And everyone kind of assumed like, okay, maybe we're going to have to go live like within the next couple hours or something.
Right.
And then he came out and was like, or it could take them a while. And it was like,
what?
Yeah, those are the two options.
Nail it down a little bit better for us than that.
Yeah. Great job there. I completely agree that they might hire someone today or might not. Really glad that you put that into focus for us. But no, before we get into that though, I think when we're looking to the lens of like how to structure and strategize this season, upcoming season coming up, we kind of have to ask, and I would like to ask you, are the 49ers looking to rebuild their roster or retool? And I think the answer to that question kind of requires some reflection in maybe what they've tried to do in the past, the success they've had so far, if there's consequences to them not maybe reaching their ultimate goal, or maybe you feel opposite, like they haven't, won the Super Bowl, but they've done a ton of winning under this regime. So when I pose that question to you, what comes up in your head for looking forward for this 49ers team and how to win the Lombardi, sooner rather than later?
Yeah. I think they're telling themselves it's a retool and run it back because they were just in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But it might end up being a rebuild. I think it's going to depend on what moves they make. It's if you're in the draft and they take, say, Robinson from Missouri, the defensive end, he's a replacement for Eric Armstead. That's a rebuild. But if they take an offensive tackle or an offensive guard or make a different move, then that could be more of a retool. So their draft is going to tell us really what their true intentions are. Right now, it could go either way. I think it'll probably end up being a mix, that they're going to try to get replacements at defensive tackle because Armstead and Hargrave don't have much longer. And they could also look at linebacker in terms of what do you do with Dre Greenlaw being out. And it might be that he can't recover for a full year, so you're going to need somebody that can really step in for a full year. And so it'll depend on what they do. They can go either way, but my guess would be that they're going to try to do both and end up rebuilding.
Okay, so interesting. I assume that their strategy is going to be to maybe like more retool. Like I think they're going to try to run it back, revenge tour 87 themselves.
Yeah.
But I do think that like maybe the foundation of this draft and who they look for could set up for a future retool. My only thing, and maybe before we get into what the Niners themselves would do, I would be interested in what you actually think they should do. Because when I'm asking myself this question, Brock Purdy basically has one more year under a rookie deal. So maybe the idea is to kind of maximize that. They were just in the Super Bowl. So I do kind of see the draw towards more of a retool, kind of fill in some holes, look to more 1 year type guys. Like, okay, for Dre Greenlaw, let's look at Aziz. Maybe we can't have him long term, and maybe the idea is to draft someone who can develop there. Same thing with Armstead. Like, maybe he's not, the future, but if you're looking to, I want to win the Super Bowl in 2024 season right now, maybe it is more, worth it to extend these guys or keep these guys for an extra year. However, I think if you're the owner, you kind of have to ask yourself, how likely is it that they actually reach that ultimate goal? Because when you are making decisions, I know Rob Stats Guerrera, he kind of got into it on Twitter about cutting Kyle Juszczyk, and that's another guy. Like it's like having first class seats, right? Like you don't need a fullback, but yeah, he's nice, and I'm being careful because sometimes my dad watches these, and my dad like loves Kyle Juszczyk for some reason.
Okay.
When I first started my channel, my dad was like, "You should do a video on Kyle Juszczyk," and I was like, anything particular or just like about him? He was like, you should just talk about him. But I was like,
yeah,
okay, Dad.
Right.
But yeah, so I do think like the way that you would navigate people, especially more restructures, resignings, and guys that you're looking for in free agency, is going to have to do more with, are you trying to win a Super Bowl next year, or are you trying to get a younger core moving forward? And,
I think they're trying to win a Super Bowl.
Developing.
Yeah. Well, You've got a team that's the third oldest team in the league that just made the Super Bowl. You've got Trent Williams for a couple more years. So I think it's a do or die now or never scenario in their minds, that this is what you have to do. But they also have to be realistic and say, can we really get back to the Super Bowl and win? They think we can. And so I think that's what they're going to try to do. Whether they can succeed in doing that is another question. So we'll see. And as Nick Nice says, Jed cares about home field. Yeah. And Jed has proven that what he wants is home field playoff games as opposed to Super Bowls. He's more interested in the money than the trophy. And I think he's proven that. In terms of what they should do,
did you not think his little victory lap before the Super Bowl kind of gave us that idea?
He was like, I go back to Yeah, I go back to his quote where he said that it's a successful season regardless of what happens against Detroit. And that I think that was a Freudian slip, that he was telling the truth. That if you think that way, it's saying, I care about the home field playoff games. I care about the money. I don't care about what happens on the field. And that's literally what he said, is, it doesn't matter what they do. So that's money first. That's money over football. In terms of Juszczyk, I think that we have to remember that Kyle is the GM, the real GM, that John Lynch answers to Kyle. And so is Kyle going to let go of Juszczyk? No. Is he going to let go of Debo? No. Kyle is going to do what fits what Kyle wants to do. And that's game planning and using these players that he trusts and knows. So I think that those guys are going to stay. He's probably going to restructure Debo.
Yeah. Which is actually, I was going to say, it kind of sucks, because I almost feel like a little bit of shakeup could do Kyle's system good. Like, he has a knack for like needing to get Debo like 8 targets in a game, even when Debo's not healthy, or not just being successful in that game. I think you can kind of tell earlier on in the game if Debo's going to have more of a Debo style game, or if maybe you should go away from him. Even we've seen him leave the game and Kyle has like no backup plan for him. And so there is part of me that's like, well, if he was like forced to scheme without him, then maybe actually his offense would utilize players who could be more consistent and could end up being even better. But
I agree, but that would require an independent GM, and Kyle has control. There's nobody in the organization that can tell Kyle no. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I do think, if I was going to bet, I think that I know there's been like a lot of discussion on like Ayuk versus Debo. I think this year it'll probably be that they could figure it out to keep both, because if they do extend Ayuk, they can lower his cap number for this year. Exactly. Debo doesn't get really expensive until next year. It's also easier for them to cut him next year, right? After June 1st.
They could, but and I'm sorry. I talked to Jason Hurley, the cap guru. He said that at 49erscap.com, Jason, good guy. He said that what they'll probably do is restructure Debo. That saves nearly $16 million. And then you extend Ayuk, and that saves another $7 million. And that creates the space to do both. So he says they can do everything. They can keep Ayuk, keep Debo, have enough space to extend Purdy, and spend about 12 to 14 million as a big swing in free agency. He thinks they can do all of that. And then it's a question of how do you spend that money?
I agree. And I was reading an article, and you were saying that you thought that maybe targeting a bookend on the other side of Nick Bosa would be a good place to start with that. If you were going to, I'd love to ask you, if you, someone says Debo needs to take a pay cut or go, I don't think he'll actually end up taking a pay cut, but I think what Tom is explaining is they can restructure his contract and kind of dispute or push it down the road a little bit so that they can keep both players. And then if they end up wanting to trade one, I do think that they might be more inclined to move off of Debo next year. Now, I agree with you with Kyle kind of having his favorites when it comes to Debo and Juszczyk. So next year, I assume that this will be a similar problem. I don't think, it's just going to be like, okay, now that Debo's cheaper, it's easy. I think that guys like Kyle Juszczyk will end up taking a pay cut because he doesn't have much of an option. I think he's kind of, they can kind of say take it or leave it.
There's a low dead cap hit for Juszczyk if they cut him, so they could.
But once again,
Kyle's the real GM. Is he going to do that? I don't think he will, because he loves Juszczyk. And the other concern with Juszczyk is that he's almost an extinct species. There's very few fullbacks left that come out in the draft. And so a fullback of Juszczyk's caliber is really hard to get.
Definitely really hard to get. I remember last year they drafted like Jack Coletto. He was on the practice squad for a little bit. I think now he's with like the Colts or the Eagles or something. The Eagles end up getting all their players. I know that they just got Ty Davis for too. Freaking next year, the 49ers should use all their third-round picks on trying to replace Juszczyk. And if they miss on all of them, it'll be no different than every other year that they've spent a third-round pick on anyone else. So that should be fine.
Please, no.
But would you grade their drafting? Do you think that they are a good drafting team? Because I was kind of
No,
no, they're
no.
not. I agree.
I think that they're good at picking one or two people that can be impact, but that their overall draft is pretty weak. That you look at all of the picks that have been made,
especially in the third round.
In the third round, and I tweeted about that this morning, is that their third round picks have a lot of busts. I mean, you've got Fred Warner, you've got Jair, you've got Embry.
I'm still holding out hope for Jalen Hurd. He's going to make a comeback.
Yeah, okay. Good luck with that, Ashley.
I was really excited when they drafted him. I was like, oh, he's going to be great.
He sounds so good. He could play running back. He could play wide receiver. He could do everything. He's hurt. Oh. So, yeah, it's just what are they actually going to do? But, yeah, I look at their draft and say, okay, in terms of the offensive line, it's more of a blind spot issue that Kyle doesn't value it. And he had his quote from the press conference at the end of the year where he said that if I wanted to load up on offensive linemen for 3 years, then I wouldn't have special skill players that would score touchdowns, and I wouldn't have guys that could get to the quarterback. You can't
get the ball to your skill players when Brock Purdy,
right.
You would have won the Super Bowl if Brock Purdy had an extra 1 second to either get the ball to Jennings or Ayuk in the end zone. But
or have more players in pass protection. Yeah.
Yeah, the Chiefs have the opposite. They freaking got rid of Tyreek Hill so that they could invest more in their offensive line.
And their defense, and did both, and it succeeded with it. My issue with the offensive line is Kyle doesn't seem to get that a rising tide lifts all boats. That if you draft in the offensive line, you get a better Brock, a better CMC, and more time to try to go after Ayuk downfield further. There's a lot more that you could do. In the Super Bowl, they only ran for 21 yards running right on 11 carries. You can't do that. It's not good enough.
I think that is a really important thing to mention, because when someone asked in the comments, the real question is, does Brandon Ayuk even want to stay? And when we talk about him, and earlier I was saying, if they were forced to get rid of Deebo Samuel, maybe Kyle would call his offensive system differently. And when we think about extending Brandon Ayuk and giving him in between $25 and $30 million, I think the majority of fans have been there's no question you should do that. And I was actually having this debate with my dad and maybe kind of trying to play a little bit of devil's advocate. And I was like, for Ayuk's production, he's, done amazing. When he was in the All-Pro selection and in the Pro Bowl, voting, we were looking at him compared to his peers, and they all had 40 to 60 more targets than him with the same amount of yards. So incredible production for his opportunity. But he himself has made it very clear in post press conferences, through his friends, through his significant other, families, whatever, that and this isn't just this year. He had a tweet about this last offseason too, where he's expressed displeasure. And when you're talking about if you invest in the offensive line, because my thing was kind of I was almost getting angry at Kyle for making Brandon Ayuk the third option in so many instances.
Yeah.
I'm
me
why
too.
don't we... And then it's it wasn't until I think I was talking with Steph on my Monday stream, and I was like, I think there's just a lot of times where there's no way that Brandon Ayuk couldn't be that because of the routes that he runs, and there's just literally not enough time for Brock Purdy to get the ball to him. There was Pittsburgh Jared posted a great thread on Twitter, and it was all these different times that Ayuk got open in the Super Bowl. But if you look at it, Brock Purdy has he's either getting hit, already has thrown the ball, or has pressure in his face at the same time that Brandon Ayuk is getting open. And these are seconds. It's not that it's taking Brandon Ayuk a long time, but because there's such little offensive line help, you're right, it really diminishes the bandwidth of your offense. It kind of forces you to play that even if Brock Purdy has a better skill set than Jimmy G, because I also got a comment not to bring him up because I know he's contentious, but I got a comment last week where someone was Brandon Ayuk wanted to play with a guy like Trey Lance more because he can throw down the field more. Well, Brandon Ayuk went on, and I think Trey has a stronger arm than Brock, but Brandon Ayuk went on Eric Armstead's podcast and said he feels with Brock Purdy, unlike Jimmy G, when he has go routes, if Brock Purdy can keep the play alive, he feels Brock Purdy has no problem getting him the ball and throwing the ball in the field. I know Kyle Shanahan has also talked about, like, he doesn't feel reservations for calling, 90% of throws down the field. I mean, I'm not saying 70-yard bombs, but down the field of Brandon Ayuk should be a play that's open and that, in my opinion, isn't limited by Brock's skill set, but is limited by the offensive line and by the way that they've set up the team.
Exactly. Yeah, Ayuk is open, but if Purdy is running for his life, he can't get him the ball. Exactly. And in the Super Bowl, since they had so many free rushers, a lot of blitzing, that Ayuk, while open, it wasn't viable for Brock to get him the ball. So the question on the screen, real question is, does Ayuk want to stay? If I'm Ayuk, I would want to go because I'm not going to be featured enough. That Ayuk on a team that could make him a number one would have superstar numbers. He'd be a bigger player in the league, and he could, in theory, make more.
Okay, see, I'm so interested. I definitely want to ask you this then, because I feel like a lot of people look at this from the 49ers perspective, right? Like I just said, even if Brandon Ayuk is getting, like, for the entire playoffs, he had 3 catches in every game, including the Super Bowl. So if he's continuing with that production, my thought, like being a 49ers person who talks about them fan, I think, like, okay, is paying Brandon Ayuk worth that amount of money if that isn't to change? Like, if Kyle didn't want to change the way that he calls his offense and Brandon Ayuk continues to be the 3rd and 4th option, is he worth that much money, even if he is so stellar and even if we know he would be better somewhere else? And I think that's kind of the thing that fans say, right? Like, they're like, well, in a different system, he would be worth that. And it's like, okay, well, like, right, this isn't a different system. So, like, you either need kind of a guarantee that Kyle is willing to change his play calling and make him more of a priority. Now, I will say, when we're, once again, because, like, the overall question is, like, rebuild or retool, Brock Purdy, if we believe in him, he's a little bit younger. He's kind of ascending. I think a lot of these guys, Juszczyk, Kittle, those, even Debo, I would kind of say have kind of had their prime, and you're either, like, your goal is to either maintain or even diminish a little bit, where I agree. I think Ayuk, like Purdy, is someone who is ascending. So he wouldn't just be good for this year, which I agree. They're definitely going all in trying to win a Super Bowl this year. But if they were to fail to reach that goal, I think that Purdy, Ayuk, those guys are still going to be good moving forward in seasons and still players that are worth paying. But that's looking for the 49ers perspective. What I want to ask you, and we can get into that one more too, because I think I chatted the whole time just kind of saying my idea. But if you're Brandon Ayuk, if the 49ers are willing to pay you, let's say, I think Brandon Ayuk is probably going to want something around what CeeDee Lamb makes, because I think he assumes if he was in that style offense.
He's about that level of a receiver in the league.
If the 49ers are willing to pay him something like that, do you think he, and this is more like trying to assess someone's maybe personality, and obviously we're not in Brandon Ayuk's head, but do you think he would want to, like, if he had the option to go, and I know he's also on a 5th-year option, so this is more of a thought experiment. I'm just trying to get inside Ayuk's head.
Right.
Do you think that Ayuk would want to go to another organization where he had the opportunity to be that number one if the pay was the same on both teams?
I think he would. I think he would want to move on if in a perfect world, but I think that if the Niners offer him the money that he would get elsewhere, that he would stay. Because he knows that he's going to get a baseline, and he's on a team in terms of touches, etc. And that over time, in theory, that given the chemistry he's built up with Brock, that he should continue to build on that, and he'll get more touches over time, especially if the Niners invest in the offensive line. So he can look at the Niners situation and say, now, right now, statistically, for me, it's not as good as someplace else. But long term, it's on a team that's contending for championships. Yeah. And I've got a quarterback that works well with me and is looking for me. And if they make the offensive line investment, then I'm good. So I think that'll help the matter. It's just a question of if the Niners match the money he can get elsewhere, I think Ayuk would end up staying. Because it'd still be hard to move him and make up everything else happen in terms of what he would want in the situation, team, contention, role, all of that stuff. It's hard to do. So I don't think he would be willing to sacrifice what he's got now for something that might be an unknown. But if it's a team where it's a great quarterback, great system, and all they need is just a receiver, then maybe he'd say, I want to do that instead. Chicago, for example, they might take Caleb Williams first in the draft. They only have one receiver. If they made a trade of, say, Jalen Johnson for Ayuk, now Ayuk has the clear number 1 or 2, depending on how they see DJ Moore in Chicago.
Is that a fair? Is that a fair? I think that the 49ers would want more than just Jalen Johnson.
Well, they were after him in the trade deadline, and he's one of the best DBs in the league, so I think he's possible. The other one is Patrick Surtain, same thing.
I was thinking with Chicago because they have 2 number 1s, right? So they could use their higher one on Caleb and then trade like their number 9, but try to get something like a 4th round pick back or something.
Yeah, they would need more than Ayuk for 9, but I don't know if they're going to do that. I don't think they would. But I think that what people aren't looking at, but maybe should, is Ayuk for a veteran starter back. And so that would be Ayuk for Jalen Johnson, Ayuk for Patrick Surtain, something like that. Because in the draft, the problem is that the receivers don't have the full skill set that Ayuk does. He's really unique in that he's complete. He can do everything well. And so you look at the receivers and say, they have speed but not power. They can block or not be able to get downfield as quickly or not as good in separation. There's a lot of receivers that have 80 to 90% of Ayuk, but nobody has 100. And so it might be that the Niners say, well, maybe I'm better off filling another need elsewhere. And then that frees up the draft to not have to worry about that position.
Okay, I agree with that. Now, I'm interested. I think if Brandon Ayuk could guarantee he was going to go to the Chiefs or something, he would be, 100%
he'd be all over that, sure.
Yeah, he'd be 100% down. But I think when I was looking at maybe what because the 49ers tend to overestimate the amount of value they can get for their players. And you think about it, they wanted to move off Jimmy for 3 years and wouldn't accept any offers that they were getting for him. So I was looking at the cold, I was looking at high, in the 10s, first round picks for Brandon Ayuk.
I don't know if you could do that. In terms of the chat, I know Jalen Johnson is a free agent, but you can still work it out. You can still do a sign and trade of some kind.
I have a question with
the other one would be if Johnson, you can't make that work, and they're probably going to end up tagging him anyway. The other DB is Surtain. That I think that's a possibility. Denver needs receivers, and Niners have been after Surtain for a while.
I'm interested. I think Surtain would be incredible. Now, you would put Charvarius Ward at corner 2 in that instance? And
I think that Ward, you would have Ward and Surtain as your outside guys and Lenoir as your inside.
Okay, that makes I like that. I agree and the 49ers are kind of lucky that they didn't struggle with cornerback injuries as much as they have in the past. I know that occasionally guys went out, but there was no catastrophic. Obviously Hufanga, but then he was immediately replaced with Jair Brown, who stepped in really well from him in the safety position. So I agree that they'll want to be looking there really quick. Al Bundy says, Jalen Johnson is a free agent. How would the Bears trade him? Is he a free agent? I have no idea.
He is, but
okay.
You can still sign and trade, or you can work out something else down the road. But there's a way that you could do it if you wanted. But my estimation, my guess is that they're going to franchise tag him anyway. He's too valuable to them. They're going to keep him.
And I'll also answer to Patel. He says, Paling Johnson really hurts Lenoir, who is playing his butt off for a contract next season. I think that if given the opportunity to have Jalen Johnson or Lenoir, the 49ers would rather keep Lenoir. Obviously,
Yeah, but it's not 2 DBs, it's 3. You've got your 2 outside corners, then your slot guy.
Yeah.
I think the need for them is they need a 3rd DB. They don't have it.
Yeah, I think maybe he's considering if you have to pay them all, but we're more talking about this year right now with Brandon Ayuk, and that kind of goes to our acceptance that the 49ers are maybe, although looking long term, they're definitely trying to win the Super Bowl right now and willing to allocate money and resources to making that their first priority. They're not in a total rebuild where they're not even concerned with competing for championships this year. But I really liked hearing from that. Now, the other guy that I thought was interesting that we brought up earlier was Aziz Al-Shaair, and I wanted to ask you about him and if you think that targeting him, because I've kind of heard the debate go both ways, right? That maybe Fred or Dre Greenlaw, might be healthy, so it could be, stupid to pay Aziz whatever it would be, and that the 49ers should rely on the guys that they've drafted. But once again, we've kind of talked about the guys they've drafted, and they haven't nailed people out of the park in that position. And I think we saw what an effect Dre Greenlaw going down in the Super Bowl had if this team is competing for championships. I'm under the assumption, I know I've had a lot of people kind of debate this in my comments when I've talked about it previously, where they've said that Dre Greenlaw, is going to be back in 6 to 8 months. I think that in order to be healthy, like back in full speed in the way that Dre Greenlaw plays, which is 100% all out, I think that it will take a full season to try to get him back.
I'm with you that there's one thing where you can get back and technically make it back onto the field, but it's another to be Dre Greenlaw again. And I think that's going to take longer, especially given the way he plays, that he's a really violent player and he uses his speed a lot. So he's going to depend on that Achilles and everything else. He's going to need to be 100%. And I think he's earned, through everything that he's done for the team, he's earned the benefit of the doubt to say, take your time, Dre. We'll have your back, but when you're truly ready to play, then we'll plug you back in.
That was another thing.
I think they have to look at Aziz because Oren Burks, he gave up, he was targeted 9 times in the Super Bowl, gave up 9 completions, 134.7 quarterback rating against. And you can say, well, what about the rookies? Jalen Graham, D. Winters, but that's a big risk. With Aziz, you know what you're getting, and you get a guy that, fits in your system well, that the teammates love him, the coaches love him. You're getting exactly what you need, and you know what you're getting. And that's pretty rare in free agency to have all that lined up. It seems like a Niners move to me to say, we're going to bring Aziz back. And that way you don't have to worry about linebacker in the draft, and you can assure yourself that we've got a guy that can step in, and Dre can take his time. If it takes him a year, Aziz can play. If it takes him less, we still can use Aziz in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because he's really effective.
They can sign Aziz to like a 1-year deal, so it doesn't feel
if they wanted to, but I think it would make more sense to keep him longer term. But if they thought that, within another year that Jalen Graham could be that linebacker, then you can try signing Aziz to a year. But given where he is in his age and contract, it makes the most sense for him to get a longer term deal.
That makes sense. And I think that would be fine, like if they were able to keep that tandem together for a little bit cheaper, because Dre Greenlaw, what a lot of people, it sucks for him because he just got injured, but he got re-signed at like a really cheap deal for his production at the beginning of not this season but last season, right? And then balled out that season, and now he's coming off an Achilles, so I don't think he's going to be asking for major money whenever his time comes up. I definitely think that I did see, did you see, like, not to call him out or anything, but just as a discussion topic, I saw Larry Krueger went on KMBR and said that he thought that the 49ers were going to cut Greenlaw, which I don't think that even makes sense money wise. So I don't know why they would do that.
Well, he doesn't make enough where that,
Yeah, he doesn't make enough. And also it doesn't seem like the 49ers are kind of that type of organization. They usually try to take care of their guys a little bit, especially injury wise.
Yeah. Well, again, I think we have to factor in that Kyle's the real GM. What's Kyle going to want to do? He's going to want to keep everybody. And going through the cap, they can create enough room to keep everyone, provided that they restructure Debo. That's $16 million to restructure Debo. The problem is then you add another year to his deal. But then you have to ask yourself, is Kyle ever willing to get rid of Debo anyway? You can't look at these things in a vacuum and just say,
I like that.
We need to get rid of
Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I know in a fairy tale world, we're moving off of him. We're making his number lighter. But let's be real about how we're going to be acting. I like that. Shouldn't be like that.
And the other factor is that everybody's saying, well, they're going to have to extend Purdy. Yeah, but they can structure his deal so they give him a gigantic signing bonus, and the first 3 years aren't that bad in terms of the cap hit. So there is a transition that they can use. But as M. Patel points out, there's still a lot of impact free agents next year that the Niners are going to have to make decisions on. And some of those guys, they're going to have to let go.
Yeah.
Then it becomes a question of, is Kyle willing to do that? That's going to be his test, is that
they've kind of had, it's kind
up?
of interesting under their regime. Like, they kind of have had this, like, collective, obviously they got rid of Buckner, but they kind of do have this thing where they've kept their guys almost to a fault. Like, when we're talking about Juszczyk, someone in here asked, like, I think they need to cut or restructure Juszczyk. I think they're way more likely to restructure him. But yeah, when we're looking at guys like Armstead, Mitchell, people like that, I imagine that they're going to be trying to keep those guys. Now, I think just by looking at whatever you want to call it, the Cabo crew, whatever, like just the in crowd, I think you can look at this list and see some people who maybe won't be priorities for Kyle Shanahan to keep too. It's kind of intense, the favoritism.
Yeah, well, let's go through them. Ambry, I don't think so.
No.
Lenore, absolutely. He's ascending and he's playing better and will continue. Ward, same thing. You got to keep him.
He also has flexibility. Ward can play inside and outside. He's done really well.
Mitchell, great player, but they don't give him enough carries. Greenlaw, I think.
I think they're going to try to. Yeah, I guess you're right. My thing is, think about how long they kept Jeff Wilson Jr. I feel like Kyle Shanahan has that same sort of like thing for Mitchell, because Mason has literally been better, and Kyle Shanahan is like, Mitchell is my guy. So I feel like if there's a way for them to keep it, I think that they'll try to keep Mitchell, but that's just my...
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. That's a great point. It's just a question of how much. And if they can keep Mitchell at a low price, they probably do. Greenlaw, same thing. Hufanga, they'll keep him. Lynch in particular loves him. Mason, no. Unfortunately. And I think Mason is...
Fans everywhere want him to, but he could... I mean, they could have... I think if Kyle had the option for him to just go on the practice squad this year, he might be doing that, depending on where they draft the roster.
He'll make the roster, but he won't get carries. And you just say, Kyle, what are you doing? He's a great back. Banks, they probably will, but it depends on how much. Armstead, I think they have to let him go. In terms of, they're talking in the chat about Juwan Jennings, I think, second round tender on Jennings, and then if somebody wants to sign him, then the Niners get that pick. But I think that's what they'll do as a way of discouraging teams. Are you really willing to give up your second for Juwan Jennings? Probably not. But I think that's what they might have to do. If they go to a third round tender, I think teams would take him. So I think they probably have to go to second.
Can I ask you to explain to me in dumb people terms what that means?
So they put Jennings
have something where he can't go to a different team unless
Jennings is a restricted free agent. So in order to get possession of that player, you would need to say that I am willing to sign this player in free agency knowing that I'm going to have to pay you that tender. So the Niners put a second round tender on Jennings. If a team wanted to sign him, they would have to give the Niners their second round pick this year. Or if you put a third round tender on him, then they'd have to pay a third rounder, so on. So I think that's why the Niners go with the second rounder, because I don't think teams would be willing to do that. Great as a player as Juwan is, I don't think a team would be willing to give up their second. And the closer you get to the draft, the more teams value the picks.
I agree. Now, when do they start putting these tenders on people? It's this upcoming...
I don't know the deadline on doing that, but the process will start soon. But to me, that's what makes sense, is that second should, in theory, remove the risk. Third would be a little iffy. If you put a third round tender on him.
I think Juwan Jennings' value has actually gone up to the team this year compared to even last year.
Yeah. And he's another one where just in a vacuum you can say, Juwan's replaceable, yes, but is Juwan's blocking replaceable? No. And that's part of what you need to look at with the Niners, is the positionless football aspect of all these receivers can block. And how many receivers in this draft can block? Not all of them.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at maybe the decision-making process that could be possible between Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. I think having a guy like Juwan Jennings, who isn't their star power, but definitely knows the system and can block and do a lot of things that Kyle wants. If you were to lose either of those guys, I think it's important to have like your third guy. Now, I have seen people say if they could move off of Jennings and sign Bourne for something cheaper, that could make sense. Now, Bourne isn't the blocker that Jennings is, in my opinion.
No.
But they
and
do
that's
have
why
that
you keep Jennings. I mean, Bourne has been good. He's played really well for New England. He's improved since his time with the Niners. But he's not the blocker that Jennings is, and the Niners need that. Also, I think that you have to factor in the chemistry element of the trust that Brock has in just saying that I know I could throw a 50-50 ball to Juwan and he'll get it. Yeah. And with other rookie receivers, that'll take some time.
Especially in Kyle Shanahan's offense, you don't even know if those rookies.
Yeah, will they play? No. Yeah, will they be redshirted? Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to our overall point of like, are they looking towards a couple of years on the line or to right now? And if they're looking to right now, then you shouldn't be putting all your eggs in the rookie basket, because with Kyle Shanahan, those guys might not even make an impact on the team. Now, really quick, Jesus says, why is it automatic that the local media insists on overpaying Brock? And that kind of transitions me into the question, which we've been talking about, but maybe like we can be more pointed about it. In your opinion, has Brock Purdy shown in his limited playing time, and obviously the 49ers don't really need to, I guess, ask this question until they start, looking towards extending him, but they are making decisions that will impact their future this year, or like they're making decisions this year that will impact their future. And right. I think they're doing that with maybe the decision that Brock Purdy might be someone who's sticking around for a while. Do you think that is fair? Like, do you think that Brock Purdy has proven himself so far to be worthy of that?
I think there's two aspects to it. I keep going back to this. It's pull the string, and Kyle's the real GM. Kyle's the real GM. And so I go back to that of I think he's already decided Purdy is the future. And Kyle is not good at evaluating quarterbacks to begin with. So I think that now that he has someone that runs the system,
can I pause you?
That he'll do it. Yeah.
Can I pause you? Do you think that Kyle Shanahan thinks that like Brock Purdy is so good that he doesn't want to look for another quarterback, or he's good enough and Kyle Shanahan can't evaluate quarterbacks and hates the whole process of it, and because he's good enough,
I think it's more the latter, is that Kyle knows he's not good at that, and that the reboot could take a long time, and that's why he keeps Purdy, because otherwise, given that the Niners aren't good at evaluating a quarterback and developing him, that to get to where they are with Purdy now would cost them years they don't have, because they want to compete in the Super Bowl next year. So I think that for Kyle, he's going to say that, no, Purdy's my guy. Now, from an abstract football sense, should Purdy be your franchise guy? No, you can get more Purdys in terms of better talents, but are the Niners willing to take the time? No, we've already seen that with Trey Lance, they weren't. So I think that Kyle is going to default to saying that, no, Brock Purdy's my guy. But if I was a GM of an NFL team, would I re-sign Brock Purdy or extend him to a $50 million a year deal? No. But I think Kyle will.
I like this. I think that it hasn't quite been proven yet how good he can be. I am interested to see how he'll play this year, because this is going to be his first year with an offseason where he's not rehabbing from his elbow injury. And then his first year, you always hear with the people coming out of college that they're like practicing for a million different things and don't really get to like specify on, a certain aspect of their game as much. I know that Brock Purdy did try to increase his arm strength a little bit that first rookie year. Yeah.
Well, he came out of Iowa college, State. Right? Yeah. When he came out of school, he worked before the draft on improving his velocity. And they changed his mechanics so he got more hip torque, and that gave him more power in his throw. And I think that's part of why he went last, is because teams were evaluating who Purdy was, and it turns out that Purdy was a different quarterback by the time the draft.
Yeah, like he was actually able to add a lot to him, which is kind of impressive, because I know that like all quarterbacks try to do that. And I've heard of like Joe Burrow, the successful ones who they ask. So obviously I'm sure that there's stories of people who I always find that funny, like when you're looking at things like this, like you're only going to hear the success stories because no one's going to go up to the guy who has no arm strength and be like, hey, did you try and then fail at adding arm strength? But I was going to say, I know with Joe Burrow and Josh Allen, both of them talked about really learning that like lower body mechanics and having that add to their throwing abilities. And I found it interesting. Brock Purdy in his exit interviews at the locker room, conferences that I was watching, he actually said this year he was going to focus on a little bit more of his like mobility and physicality. But
he also said he'd work on his arm strength. He's going to do both of those
for sure. But I think that would be like because I found this year, even more so than last year, maybe he did a couple times last year, but this year I found like some of his escapability and like he would do, especially in the playoffs, he had a couple like runs on his own that I was really impressed with, that I was kind of upset with Kyle Shanahan when you see Patrick Mahomes running the ball for 18, 20 yards. Like, why don't you call one of those for Brock Purdy? I think he could, not that I'm not trying to say he's like going to be a mobile quarterback, but I think he could be more mobile than, when we're looking, after the Super Bowl, people were like in my comments, like they should sign Kirk Cousins. And I'm like, no, they shouldn't do that. But thank you so much for your input.
Yeah, give Brock credit that he learned how to become a running quarterback over the course of the year. He got a better feel for the timing and when he could go. And he had a lot of key third downs in the playoffs with his legs. And so I think it's a real positive that he's going to want to keep on working on that. And the other thing to remember with Brock is that because he was hurt last year in the offseason, this will be his first offseason to develop his game. So I think that he can take a real jump.
Do you think he can like improve? And that's what's kind of interesting, right? Like when you look at his statistical output last year, maybe you won't see in the stats an improvement because he did have such a impressive year that way. But I think when you're watching the game, a lot of times you could see, and I'm not trying to take away from it, I also thought he ran the system or optimized the system. Optimization is a good word, in a really positive way. But I do think that there's a way that without a statistical jump, because he was already first in so many categories, that just watching the game, you see an improvement in his ability. And
that he'll be able to do more. That if he has a stronger arm, he'll be able to get it through tighter windows faster. He'll be able to make those throws to Ayuk that he didn't attempt in the Super Bowl because he was too covered. And that Purdy might have more confidence in what he can do to get him the ball in a specific spot.
Yes, and really quick, I liked this. M. Patel said, Purdy put up those numbers behind a 22nd ranked pass blocking line. Give Brock time. I agree with that. Like when it goes both ways, right? Because I remember, I think it was Dak got he was like the Pro Bowl quarterback over Brock Purdy by like one vote or something. And I remember I could understand that because I was like, Purdy has a better play caller, better weapons around him and stuff like that. But when you think of offensive line, that is something like people love to give Brock or maybe criticize Brock Purdy for the stuff that he does have. And so I do think it is fair to also give him credit for the stuff he doesn't have, which is that O-line. I know for myself, looking back when I rewatched the Super Bowl, did you watch the JT O'Sullivan breakdown of it? There was a lot.
It's still too painful.
It's also an hour.
I will at some point, but I can't do it yet.
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. I watched the freaking. I don't want to get it. I know this topic has been beat to death, but I watched the mic'd up, the full thing. The full thing is like 45 minutes.
That's even more painful. Oh,
it was so like feeling the players' emotions on the phone, like seeing how many. It's when you were watching it firsthand, like. Not you, but like the general you. When I was watching it firsthand, I think because you're just like you're rolling with the punches, right? Like you're going with the emotions. When you watch it back, and when I was watching that mic'd up, like the amount of opportunities that they had, like over and over again, like they should not have won that game because the fact that they like had so many errors. They played like their worst game in the Super Bowl. Like when you're supposed to play their best game is when they just like kept for lack of a better word, like fucking up, and then getting more opportunities and then wasting those again too. Oh, it's so frustrating. And then like seeing the maybe mentality, like, and how it shifted. I always love that, like when you're reading a book, right? Like you get like, I like to think of football games kind of like that, like a movie, like a storyline,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
3-act play movie.
exactly.
Yeah.
And kind of you like hear the excitement, the voices, the self-belief, and you like physically hear and like feel that slipping away, and you like see the Chiefs gaining it, and it's just, and then like especially when you know what's gonna happen, it's like watching like a Shakespeare play when you know they're all gonna die at the end, and you're like,
yeah, you know,
so
the tragedy
painful.
is coming, but in the moment it's even harder because you know
Yeah,
that is happening.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
tough because you see their hope. You see them thinking that if we can get this, we've got it. But then there's
And
some unblocked rusher that comes in that screws it all up. And Kyle is there sending everybody out in routes and bringing nobody back to help and not adjusting. And it's a train wreck in slow motion. It's really hard to take. But yeah, what I wrote in my article after the Super Bowl was death by 1,000 cuts. And that's what I think this Super Bowl was, is that all those cuts, and most of them were unforced errors. And you can go back to so many plays where you just say, if not for this one thing, but there's like 50 of those things.
50 of them, and you're like,
you can pick one or two and they win.
Yeah,
but because all 50 happened when they did, they lose. And that makes it even harder. I mean, it's just,
people are like in the comments probably like, dude, why are we reliving this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry guys. It's just
the reason I brought that up, but I agree. And I feel like I'm like kind of sadistic in that way where I like getting into the emotions of it. I'm before I did content, I used to watch a lot of the football games with my dad, and he was like, a lot of times, because they're on Sunday, we would go hiking or something in the day, so we would record the game and then like go watch it at home after. And my dad is like a big like no spoilers person, like he doesn't want to know, and he always wanted me to not know with him, but I always want to know, so I
but you wanted to first.
On Twitter, and like you'd see like Jordan Elliott be like, "What the fuck, Jimmy?" And you're like, "Oh my god, what did Jimmy do?"
Yeah.
But it's so funny because like it doesn't for me take away the like anticipation or the excitement. Like when I was watching the mic'd up, like completely knowing what's happened, having watched the game and rewatched the game, I still feel like when I see like there's a shred of hope, I'm like, oh, you guys,
you feel it.
And I'm like, wait, no, you can't, so
yeah.
And then you're just like watching it and seeing like 1,000 different ways that it could have gone differently.
But I get where you're coming from. You're immersed emotionally, so you can still relive the moment, even though you know what happened. And so your emotion is still true and honest. And I'm sure your dad loved that part of it because that's what he wants, is that you're there responding as he does. But I get where you're coming from, and I want to know. It's always hard for me that if I can't see the game live, I always end up finding some way to find out what happened first.
Yeah, I don't know why spoilers just don't. I'm like, I want to know. I'm so that I studied psychology in school, and there's this like trick that you're supposed to do with your, not that you're supposed to do, but that you can do with little kids, where you like set them on a table and you like leave a marshmallow in front of them and you tell them to like not eat the marshmallow, and if they don't eat it when you leave and they come back, you can give them like 2 or something. It's talked about like delayed gratification basically, and it's supposed to be like this indicator of all this success, and I'm always like, I would fail at that. I would like I'm not a kid and my parents didn't get this, but I know me, and I am such like a I want to know now. I want to try to figure it out in my brain. Like it's a game that I have no impact on, but I'm like, if I can just think about it enough, I'll change it. I'll just put enough mind.
You can will it into being. Yeah.
I'll put enough. But the reason that we got on this is I was talking about the JTL Sullivan breakdown, and I just wanted to say, like, I came away from that with like a lot more respect from Brock Purdy than maybe just like initially watching the game when I looked at the O-line and just like how much straight drop passing they were kind of relying on, which is, I think, a weakness in Kyle's offense for him.
Yeah.
I felt like Brock Purdy made a lot of plays happen where there could have been negative plays if it wasn't for him. So I do think he deserves a lot of credit. I don't think he like I definitely think we've probably seen him play better games where he's made like more wow throws or done more with his legs. But I think I think I gave him like a B or B minus when I first watched it after the game. And then when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, there actually were some like A-level moments that he had that I didn't maybe recognize in the moment because it wasn't like as flashy as watching a 70 yard throw from Josh Allen. But when you're seeing it and you're seeing how critical, keeping that drive alive was, you're like, okay, that was actually really great by Brock Purdy.
Yeah, it's not so much the throws as his escapability that can jump off the screen of just how is he able to do that and still make a throw downfield. And that's something he's going to work on in the offseason and get better. And the more you do it, the better you get at it because you get a better feel for the timing.
Now, I'm kind of interested in this because people are talking in the comments about how much money Brock Purdy they think maybe will be worth. And someone says, plus Dak will get 60, so the market will be set to 60.
Yeah, well, when I talked to Jason Hurley, he projected 50 to 55 and said that it'll depend on how next year goes statistically. But as the chat has pointed out, Dak's contract is ridiculous, but it still sets the market level. And if Purdy has better stats than Dak, then his agent can say, here's the comparison, my client deserves more money, blah, blah, blah. And but I think Jason's about right. I think 50 to 55 sounds right to me. And that's a lot.
And I don't know. That's a huge amount of money. And I don't know if you agree. Like, I've kind of seen this because I think Brock does a really good job in the media of kind of putting on this aw shucks good guy mentality.
Well, part of that is just who he is, which is cool.
Yeah, I agree. I shouldn't even say it like that, but because I think you're right. Especially this is like very side notey, but I, not being a very religious person, not that I'm not like I'm spiritual and believe in praying and stuff, but I never like consistently going to church or anything like that. I love the way that he talks about his religion. I feel like he is able to bring it up without like, I don't know. I've heard like Carson Wentz. You think of like Tim Tebow, guys who like talk about their, like, you're like, is your goal to win the football game or to convert me? Like, I think maybe either of them work for you. Where I love when Brock Purdy's asked about it, I feel like he's very calm and prepared. Like, I think it was pre-Super Bowl when everyone in the world was at that media availability day, and some people were asking ridiculous questions, but some person like kind of asked him like, does he pray? And he made a really cool distinction because I've heard like, I think it was Jalen Ramsey one year that they played the Rams, and he was like, like, we won because like God wanted us to win. And I'm like, God isn't like a Rams fan. Like, God, there's someone on the other team who's ridiculous, who's, religious. Like, does God not like his team? And I thought the cool thing that Brock Purdy said, and as someone who's kind of spiritual and like tries to just get in touch with like the universe and breath and stuff like that, he kind of said like, he doesn't pray like, hey God, can I win? He prays like, please like calm me. Please allow me to be centered. Please allow me to be my best self. Please allow me to feel in my body, to feel in the moment. Like, just a lot of centering kind of mindfulness stuff. I know Trivarius Ward has also talked a lot about mindfulness. And I thought that was just like a cool distinction. But
it's a cool reflection of who he is. That his religion is more internalized in terms of how he uses it, how it grounds him. And I think that also comes across in how he talks about it. While, as you said, with somebody like Tebow, it's more external directed,
like sales pitchy, right?
As opposed to Brock saying, ground me. It's just there's two different worlds there.
But what I did want to say with Brock Purdy, although I agree, all these things about his character are great, is I've seen this narrative online from a certain section of the fan base that I do disagree with, because although I think Brock Purdy has humility, has, a sense of humbleness, I've heard this narrative that he's going to take this hometown discount for the 49ers and that he's so grateful they drafted him and like he's going to get $30 million and be ecstatic. And I just, for people watching my channel, I just want to get it out there that I do not agree with that narrative.
No.
I think that these guys do have words are so interesting, right? Because people always have their own like understanding of what a word means. So when I say ego, I feel like that can come off as negative. But I think a lot of these guys have a really healthy ego. I think to get to the NFL, to get to this high level, you have to have some sense of self and belief in yourself and ego and feeling of deservedness. And I think that Brock Purdy does have that. And although is probably very grateful to the 49ers, wants to stay here, will probably work out a deal with them. I am against the narrative that some fans and content creators are pushing that he's just going to take this giant discount to keep the block together, you know?
Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen. It's just, it can be balanced by an agent where he just says it's a matter of fairness, that he's better than this guy, therefore he should be paid X. And Brock looks at that and says, yeah, that makes sense. As opposed to Brock saying, gee, I'm so grateful that the Niners reduced my income by drafting me rather than signing me as a free agent, that I'm now going to give them more money back. No, it doesn't work that way. And he's in an apartment with roommates. It's just, he's made a sacrifice in terms of his lifestyle.
I'm the quarterback for the freaking San Francisco 49ers, baby. Like,
right.
Better...
And as Kudo points out, he'll be married, and he's got his wife and a future family to think of. Brock will get what the market will pay. I don't think there's going to be a market discount. And Jesus says 55 a year for Purdy. Unfortunately, that's the market. And I think that, again, Kyle being Kyle, he's going to say, well, I would rather compete now with Purdy than spend 3 years in developing another quarterback to replace him.
I completely agree. And I think when you go back to the victory lap that Jed York took prior to the Super Bowl, because we love that he did that. Not only did he say basically Kyle Shanahan has a lifetime contract, once again, before Kyle Shanahan blew another 10-point lead in the Super Bowl, but that's fine. Not only did he say that, but he also, I think, literally called Brock Purdy a franchise quarterback. So, if I'm the agent, I'm right. I'm like quoting Jed in my freaking.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you've already got the game plan.
Actually, what you specifically said was this.
Your owner said X. But Jesus is saying no team is drilling for Purdy. That's absolutely true. But Purdy doesn't have to compete as a free agent. This is an extension. And he's got a captive GM in Kyle that's saying that I've got my quarterback that does what I want a quarterback to do in my system. I know I'm bad at developing one. I know it'll take too long, and this team's competing for a Super Bowl. Therefore, I'm going to pay Purdy market value and keep him. It's not about the competition. It's about what Kyle will do. And this is part of the price the Niners pay for having Kyle as the real GM.
Now, do you think that, because I'm interested in that, no team is drilling for Brock Purdy. I think that there's quite a few teams that would give up assets for Brock Purdy right now. Now, I don't think he's like going to be on the market. Well, I agree.
For now, sure, because he's dirt cheap, but at $55 million, no.
Okay, this is such a hypothetical because we don't know, and maybe it's not. I think I was in the camp, even just at the beginning of the season, that these kind of conversations aren't fair, because I do think guys like a Kirk Cousins type are kind of undervalued, only because like people don't understand, like, it is impressive to keep that level of success for so long, even if it's like mediocre compared to amazing. But what I was going to say is, like, if Brock Purdy and Kirk Cousins were on the same, like, both free agents, both going to make around the same amount of money, which one would you rather have? Brock Purdy because younger, Kirk Cousins because more experienced. Also, let's say Kirk Cousins free Achilles there, because I think he might have just fallen to Achilles.
Right. Well, it goes back to your overarching
that
question.
Would be an interesting discussion for Kyle Shanahan himself, because he's like kind of
because he's the big Kirk Cousins guy. But that goes back to rebuild or retool. That if you say, okay, I'm going to get rid of Purdy and I'm going to spend that money on Kirk Cousins, then that's an all-out move for now. But I think you have to question if Cousins is going to be back to the player he was, especially given his age. it's tough to recover from an injury like that old. But still, I think that all of this stuff, it comes back to one thing. Kyle is the offensive coordinator, the head coach, and the GM, and the offensive coordinator is going to demand that he keeps Brock Purdy.
I have a question. This is like not even written down, side notey, just for you. If they make it to the playoffs, maybe even make it to the NFC Championship game, but let's say they miss the Super Bowl next year. Like, do you think that there's ever going to be, ever is a strong word. Do you think within the next 2 to 4 years that there's going to be a situation if Kyle Shanahan doesn't win the Super Bowl where a little bit of power is taken away from him? Because when we've talked about this like rebuildness, we've kind of talked about like, especially I don't know if we'll get into it today. Maybe by next week they might even hire a defensive coordinator. But when people were bringing up Bill Belichick, I think a big discussion would be like, okay, would Kyle have to relinquish some power? And my and I don't necessarily know if like Belichick is the person to do this, maybe even Vrabel, whatever. But my thought on that is actually maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing for Kyle to have to give up some power. But do you think that Jed York will want him to? Because obviously Kyle isn't going to demote himself at all. So if they continue to have success at, because someone right in the beginning of the chat, in the beginning of the stream, didn't we started off saying Jed York is kind of fine with as long as they're getting home field playoff games. Do you think
that's going to be the metric? I think that's going to be the key, is that the way that Kyle can be let go is if Jed doesn't get his playoff home games. Then you're talking what Jed values. Then it's possible. So if Kyle loses the team, or for whatever reason the team just says that we're not buying into this any longer, and then they end up being a wild card team without a home playoff game, then it's possible that they could move on from Kyle. And next year would be interesting because Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator at Detroit, would theoretically be looking around at head coaching jobs again. And so if you wanted to say we need a great offensive mind,
you're saying that Ben Johnson.
But I think that if I was the owner, I would make that move in a heartbeat next year, is that I would trade Kyle Shanahan for picks and hire Ben Johnson, provided that Ben Johnson committed. But is that a possibility for the Niners? Probably not. It would depend on if the team says we're not buying what Kyle's selling anymore, and if they only get to the wild card and don't have a home game in the playoffs, then I think Jed might consider changes. But enough to get rid of Kyle in a year, probably not. But it's another one of those where if I were the GM bits, that's what I would do. I would hire Ben Johnson.
Really, I like this. I think Tom is breaking news on my channel saying
hardly. Like Kyle's going to listen to me.
Saying that Ben Johnson turned down head coaching opportunities this year so that he could come coach the 49ers in 2025. I agree. 5-star hands of that. Good job. We've seen what he's done with Jared Goff. I believe he'll do good for Kirk Cousins. I thought something and we'll kind of start ending it soon, but something that you said that I would just be interested in if you picked up on those press conferences, and in the way, like we kind of talked about seeing the mic'd up and seeing how the players have maybe responded online and even in their press conferences right after the Super Bowl and 2 days later. Do you feel, because I think there has been this consistent buy-in to Kyle Shanahan. I often, when giving this example, I think to my dad, I talked about just in the playoffs when Kyle Shanahan accidentally called a run for Jawan Jennings, like a handoff to Jawan Jennings. Everyone was like, we're just going to run it because we believe, we might think this is ridiculous, but we are so bought into whatever Kyle says that we're just going to do it, try to execute it, and believe that he's right. Now, obviously, that was kind of just an error in words, but do you think, when I was listening to George Kittle, a reporter kind of asked him, was like prompting him, saying, the last time when you lost in 2019, you had your infamous "I will be back" statement. Did you mutter anything like that to yourself? And George Kittle said, he said, not really. Maybe there was more to give. And then Brandon Ayuk out there talking about opportunities,
crying.
crying. Did you? And I know Nick Bosa, I think more so referring to Steve Wilkes. This should have been a sign that he was out of there. If all season was kind of a sign, but directly after Nick Bosa kind of talked about being not prepared for what the Chiefs were going to bring, which obviously is a Wilkes problem, but we've constantly heard that Kyle Shanahan is interjecting himself into those meetings. Do you think this is one of those things where if there's like a slump in the middle of the season next year, is how many times can you kind of get to the top of the hill without these core players maybe starting to side eye Kyle Shanahan, and if they can ever actually reach that?
We might see that play out next year. Is that it's tough. You put your heart or your mind, your soul into a player and project and say, this was a career-defining game for a lot of people where this might be it for them. This is their final Super Bowl. And you get this close and lose, and you point to the coaching mistakes and say, how much of this was on Kyle? And then Kyle says, okay, here we go. Let's make another run. How much buy-in is he really going to get? And we'll find out next year. But I think if I were a player, that's something that I would have in the back of my mind, is that my faith and my trust in Kyle might have been 100% before the Super Bowl, but now it's been shaken. Doesn't mean that it's not a foundation. It just means that there can be things where if things go bad, it can get worse because it's not 100% anymore. So I think that can factor in. But we have to see. You have the psychiatry background. You'd be far better than I would to do something like that and look at it. But I think it's possible.
I'm going to be assessing. Well, Tom, we've gone for a little bit over an hour, but I had a great first time streaming with you.
This was so much fun, Ashley. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on. For anyone who missed the beginning, I've been reading Tom's articles since he started last year, I think, but I got really into them this year, and then was even telling him, I think I'm not alone in this, but I was using a lot of his ideas to try to point my focus when I was watching games and starting with my content creation. So I felt really nice to be able to collab and kind of be like, hey,
absolutely,
you should follow this guy because he's helped me so much. So everyone, make sure Ninercast on Twitter. Make sure to follow him. Eventually, he'll have a YouTube channel. And I think for what him and I have talked about, we're going to be trying to do this every week on Wednesday around 11. So make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. And I'll be back on later tomorrow with Marco. So everyone, keep it liked and subscribed. Depending on what happens with the defensive coordinator, I might go live a little bit earlier if Tim Kawakami was really just faking us out, or if something soon is going to happen. And right before I say go, I said this earlier, but just to remind you.
In a couple weeks, it'll be Ninercast-Tom on YouTube. The site is up, but there's no content there yet. But in a couple weeks, I'll have some stuff that I'll start adding. I'm a draft guy, so there's going to be a lot of draft content on the channel.
I'm so excited to get into that with you. And when he does have that up and running, I'll make sure to have it in the chat. Right now I have like a link to your Twitter, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
So thank you guys
so
again,
much.
Ashley. I really appreciated everyone in the chat.